In this video, we'll see how to publish an MCP server based on an OpenAPI specification without writing a single line of code using Specmatic Genie. Now, let's say you're building an agentic workflow, and one of the steps in the workflow requires you to create workspaces and collections in Postman. What would really help you if you could quickly wrap Postman APIs in an MCP server which your agent can use. And that's where Specmatic Genie comes in. So we'll start with an OpenAPI specification, which includes some of the APIs that we want to include in our workflow. So we can see there are APIs for workspaces and collections. So we'll go to Specmatic Genie and first upload the spec. Over here, we can see the progress of the spec upload. It started with validating the spec, and now there is an enrichment process that takes place. This ensures that the API endpoints defined in the spec can be seamlessly mapped to tools on an MCP server. So we'll wait while this enrichment completes. Great. The spec is now successfully uploaded. Over here, we can see a summary of all the endpoints that are present in the spec and brief descriptions of what all can we do with those APIs. We can see that there are three types of APIs in the spec: collections, workspaces, and billing. Now, maybe we don't want our agent to be able to access the billing and accounts information, in which case we don't really want this accounts endpoint to be included in the MCP server. So we can tell Genie to remove this accounts endpoint in natural language like this. Great. So our spec has been updated. Now we can see that we only have workspaces and collections, and these are the curated bunch of APIs that we really want to wrap in an MCP server. Before we publish an MCP server based on these endpoints, what would really help is if we were able to test these APIs a bit to ensure that they can be exposed as MCP tools. Now, this is where Genie really shines. See, what happens is when we upload the OpenAPI specification, Genie automatically mounts every endpoint as an MCP tool. Genie also spins up a virtual service based on the OpenAPI specification, which handles all the tool calls. So the result is a very realistic simulation of what it would actually feel like interacting with real Postman APIs. Let's see a quick demo. Let's start with creating a workspace. How do we create a workspace? I don't know. Let's ask Genie. So to create a workspace, we typically need a workspace name and a bunch of other fields, type, description, about. Okay. So let's try to create a workspace. Okay, I'm gonna call the workspace Genie with type personal. So Genie says the workspace named Genie with type personal has been created. Now we have a logs tab over here, which tells us what request was made to actually create this Genie workspace. So this is Genie's virtual service, which has handled the tool call. And this is a request that it received to create a workspace. And it has created a workspace and returned an ID. Okay. Now, let's try creating a collection. I don't know how to create a collection, so let's ask Genie first. So we need to provide the collection name and the workspace ID. Okay. So I'm going to tell Genie to create a collection under the workspace Genie that I just created. Let's call it payments. So our collection called payments has been successfully created under the Genie workspace. Let's have a look at the logs. Okay. So we passed the workspace ID and it has created the collection. So this virtual service is kind of mimicking the behavior of the actual Postman APIs. So that's why this is as good as talking to the actual Postman APIs. That's the experience that we're getting with Genie right now. So in this way, we can test the APIs to our content and ensure that we are happy with them before publishing them as an MCP server. So once we are happy with our APIs and have tested them sufficiently, we can then move on to publishing an MCP server which wraps these APIs. So we go to the MCP tab. Over here, there are details on how the MCP server will be published. So Genie will publish a Docker image based on the APIs present in the specification. This is the name of the Docker image that will be published. And there are also instructions on how to run the container. We can see that Genie has inferred that we need an API key for the Postman APIs based on the OpenAPI specification, and it needs to be passed as an environment variable while running the Docker container. We've also described the endpoint on which the MCP server can be accessed. So without further ado, let's publish our MCP server. Here we go. Okay, great. So our publishing workflow has kicked off. We see that it's in progress. We can refresh the status every now and then to see where it is reached. Let's give it a few seconds. Okay, let's try refreshing this. Great. So our MCP server has been published as indicated by this status. Let's go to the Docker Hub link and see how it looks. It should take us to Docker Hub. So this is the image published by Genie for the Postman MCP server with this tag 001. If we go back to Genie, we can also find instructions on how to pull the image and run it. So let's first pull the image. Okay. We've got the image pulled. Now, to run it, we can see that it takes two environment variables. One is the base URL for the Postman APIs, and other is the API key, which would be our Postman API key. We can also see that by default, the MCP server runs on port 9090 on host. We can change this to any other port we want, but let's keep it as 9090 for now. So I've already prepared a command with my Postman API key and the Postman API base URL. So let's just run this. So now our MCP server is running via this Docker container. The question is, how do we test it? So one easy way to test it is using Claude Desktop, to which we can integrate any MCP server. So Claude Desktop has this config file called Claude Desktop config.json. And I have already configured the Postman MCP server over here, which is going to run on localhost 9090, and it can be accessed over 9090/mcp/ssc. So with this, let's try and fire up Claude Desktop and test our MCP server. So let's fire Claude Desktop. And if we look at the tools, we can see our Postman MCP is accessible. And if we expand it, we can see that Claude has access to all the tools that we have listed on the MCP server. So let's try and create a workspace using Claude now. Let's call it Specmatic. So great. Claude has created a workspace called Specmatic in Postman with this ID. Let's go and verify it. So if we open Postman, if we go to workspaces, yes, we can see that the workspace called Specmatic has been successfully created. So our published MCP server is able to properly talk to actual Postman APIs seamlessly, and we are able to integrate it in an MCP client like Claude Desktop. I mean, this MCP server can be integrated with any other app or service as needed. So in this way, we can see how easy it is to publish an MCP server based on an OpenAPI specification without writing a single line of code.